plan for this session is I'm going to share a model for raising young leaders, and it's something you can then use, and it's a little drawing that maybe you can remember and kind of apply into your context, or you can go away and just take an idea and not use it at all. That's up to you, totally up to you. Just a tiny bit of context for me, so you know a bit more of my story. I've been involved in leadership development intentionally for about 15 years, longer, 16, 17 years now. The first 10 years of that was running and being involved with an organisation called Onelife, which seeks to train young leaders. And the whole passion around that was, how do you help young people, particularly 14 to 21, 22-year-olds, to step into and influence whatever sphere of society they want to lead in. So not necessarily just church leadership, but in politics, education, arts, media, knowing that their faith can be fully alive and their passionate pursuit of Jesus doesn't equal becoming a youth pastor or a worship leader or a church leader. It does if that's the call and if that's what God's got for them, and he would have that for some of them. But for others, it's the call is into those other things and helping them discern that and then releasing them into that. Through that kind of opened up all kinds of doors as well in leadership development to different contexts. I'm now the director of the Leadership College London, which is based out of HTB in London, and through LCL we've trained hundreds of leaders in all those spheres of society, predominantly in their 20s and 30s, but we do courses for other people as well, at the older end, and more senior leaders with CEOs and everything. And as part of my work with Leadership College London, I do also corporate training for sometimes companies, businesses, and I'm currently working as well in elite sport. So I'm the leadership coach for Gloucester Rugby, their Premiership rugby club. And this little model, the reason for telling you those bits about the corporate stuff is because I've used this for years in the church. I've then done an adaptation to be used in kind of business, corporate, sports, all kinds of things. And what I see in those contexts is exactly the same for raising and training young leaders, to the point where some, particularly entrepreneurs who have started companies that have come through some of the work we've done, have actually used this as a basis for developing their teams. And they would use that as part of the language of their companies now. So I think this can be applied anywhere. So you can apply it personally for you. You can apply it for just a few young people you're working with, or if you're running some of church, company, or your people that you're working with within your church context, this may be helpful for them. And in a sense, it's just collecting together some of the things you've very naturally said as you've begun to reflect on how it works. And the model is called Safety Nets and Tightropes. And the reason it's called Safety Nets and Tightropes is because essentially we need both of those things in our approach to raising and releasing young leaders. So I don't know if anyone's actually been on a tightrope here. Some of you might be a tightrope artist. I don't know. Who knows? Secret tightrope artist in the audience today. If you go on a tightrope, and I've only done low-level ones, but if you go on a tightrope and you're at high level, of course you can get out there and do the thing. And the reason you're doing it is to get on the tightrope, and it's exciting and it's exhilarating. But if you do that without a safety net and you fall off, which inevitably you will, particularly if you're learning, you'll end up hurting yourself. And as I've looked around, here we're particularly talking about the church context, so let me just refer to that rather than all the businesses and everything, although this applies in businesses as well. But essentially in the church context, as you look across churches and working with a number of churches, particularly with Onelife, now with HTB, you'll see churches either do the safety net really well or the tightrope really well. Often, that's a kind of sweeping statement. But some churches are brilliant at getting people out there, raising. Let's give them opportunity. Let's go. Let's make this happen on the tightrope. Young leaders make it go, and they're out. But the felt expression of that can then often start feeding back that people have had a go, they've fallen off, they've hurt themselves, and then they won't get back on the tightrope again. And there's a nervousness about, actually I'm not sure that, leading or I'm not sure that's for me. Actually that hurt. Last time I tried it, it went wrong and it was embarrassing and no one picked me up and it was really difficult and I actually got injured, can't do this now in that metaphor. Other churches and other contexts can emphasize much more the safety net and not the tightrope. And so there's so much safety net around releasing people. There's so many barriers to jump through before you actually get to have a go at being released or empowered. There's so many things you have to achieve before you're even, allowed to be on the coffee rota, all of those sort of things. There's so much safety around it, and it feels a very protected environment, and leadership feels very kind of held by a close core knit group where you have to be basically performing at elite level to be in it, that actually there's so much safety net, you never get to go on the tightrope. And so people come along and they get loads of training and they get loads of development, but there's no expression of it. And so as a result, they then start going, well, if this is what leadership's about, I'm not interested. And they check out as well. And so you lose both ways if you emphasize one or the other. So the concept around safety nets and tightropes is that if you can have both of those things, then essentially you can start to develop a healthy environment where you're giving people a go whilst also providing the safety nets that are there. And I think in looking at both companies and also particularly churches, and particularly in youth ministries, as we're thinking about youth, young people emerging here, wherever I've seen a healthy expression of producing young leaders, I found all of the things that are in this model, and it's identifiable, and you can point to every single one of them. There are 6 things. Okay, so we're going to look at 3 safety nets and 3 tightropes. And you would find these things active in anywhere where there's like a healthy pipeline of young leaders coming through that expression. And so again, as we look at these 6 things, I'd love you to be challenging yourself. Are these things active in our context? Are we building them in? And are we being strategic about how we put them in? So let me do the drawing. We're going to go through this. I'll go quite quickly with the intention that we can get to a bit of 10, 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. And you can come back to me with your thoughts, ideas, additions, changes, questions. And I'll just touch on each of these 6 things. And it may be that you want to come back at the end and say, can we talk a bit more about this? Because how does that work well? And we can talk a bit more about it. Normally I'd take a lot longer going through this model, but before we hit our 3 safety nets and our 3 tightropes, so we've got this star here. Interestingly, there's a lovely verse in Daniel chapter 12, verse 3, and it says, "Those that lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars in the heaven." And there's a sense in which actually that's part of our call, isn't it? To lead others into righteousness. We are existing because we want to lead them to become more like Jesus. Right living with God. So that righteousness, those that lead many to righteousness will shine like the stars in heaven. It's a beautiful thing. So if you want a verse to attach to our model, then you can go for that one. At the very center, before we hit our 6 things, I want to emphasize that you are at the center of this. Now, obviously, from a Christian perspective, Jesus is the center. He's everything, of course, absolutely. But in terms of releasing young leaders, you've got to live and breathe this stuff, not just apply it. So you could learn these 6 things and think, right, I'll tick off these 6 things. But if they're not living and breathing in you, then you're going to have a lack of integrity in what you're trying to provoke in other people. And young people particularly, as we've heard earlier, around the cultural norms, they want authenticity, they want integrity, and they'll spot it a mile off. So if you're saying, here, we've got these 6 things going, but they're looking at your life as a leader, thinking that you have not got patterns of that in your world, then they're going to ask big questions, and they won't believe it's possible or true. And so you have to be engaging all of this. So just as we're thinking about training and releasing leaders here, other leaders, I want you to also apply each of these 6 things to your own life. Where are these 6 things existing in your life? Are you working at them? And how are they shaping up in order for you to keep growing as a leader? And so that you can then model it in order that other young leaders can copy that model in you and see that there's an integrity and an authenticity in it. So be asking that question about your involvement in each of these things all the time. So here's the first thing. And if you are taking notes or doing the drawing, put them on the same spikes as I put them, because we might get to some developed teaching on this, and it matters where they go on the spikes. So the first one is this. I'm just going to put M and A to save time, but that's mentoring and accountability. Okay, mentoring accountability is absolutely essential in the training and releasing of young leaders. And again, I mentioned it in the talk that I did a little bit earlier. I'm more and more committed to this the further on I go in learning about leadership development and learning about youth ministry and releasing young disciples. More and more committed. There can be all kinds of questions over mentoring. How does that work? What's that look like? We can come back to that at the end if you want to. But you have to build this as a pattern at the beginning, because essentially this is the bit that builds trust and character in a way that no program can. So in our churches, we can just throw a load of programs. Let's put them through a leadership development course for 5 weeks. That's going to be great in terms of competencies and perhaps upskilling them, and that's important. But it's not going to hit the personalized character development that they might need. And there's nothing that can replace the engagement of small group mentoring or one-to-one mentoring, time spent over coffee and cake, where you actually engage with the reality of a person's life and begin to work bespoke with them from where they're starting. If you miss that piece, you're going to start layering on all the competencies and skills without getting to the foundations of who a person really is, where their gifting will come from, what their motivations are, where their wins are and where their failures are. And if you can't get to that piece, then you're going to be building without foundations, and the stuff will come crumbling down later on in life. You see it happen again and again and again. In fact, most leaders who have a catastrophic fall in terms of what's going on, I've had conversations with a number of them, people who perhaps you might know, names that you might know in the church, who have basically had a major moral fall or a character fall, and often they'll root it right back to not just, it started going a bit wrong 6 months ago and then I went down the pan. No, this is something that was going on for like 20 years. And the more they got into leadership and got elevated in leadership up on the tightrope, the less they could talk about the realities of what's going on, because now they've got to perform. Now they are the leader. Now they are the person that's got to be the one that delivers. And so they're on the tightrope and they're aware there's no safety net, and at some moment it comes crashing down. Mentoring and accountability helps. It's not the answer, but it helps to underpin that as a safety net. One of the most incredible things for a young person is when you really know them. Take a 16-year-old, you really know them, and you've had conversations, real conversations. They've told you about the gifts that they've got, the things that they love. They've also told you a little bit about some of the things they struggle with, the mindset patterns that go wrong, the behavior patterns that upset them, or that they've come against them for one reason or another. And then, knowing that, you still back them to release them into leadership. They'll feel like, I can do this even though I'm fully known. And you've got to sow that into a young leader. Otherwise, you're setting up for danger later in life. This sense in which I can go to places where I can be absolutely known and real and still backed. And so you've got to build that, and that builds from that place. And of course, you can then start attending to some of those things as well. I love the verse in James 5:16. It says, it talks about confessing our sins to one another, and then our healing will quickly come. And the sense in which it actually says, confess your sins to God and to one another. So there's this whole clarity over, yes, when we're talking about the reality of our life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, yes, we might talk to that about God, but we must talk about that to each other. And building context where that can be healthy and thrive is really important for undergirding it. When I've sometimes done this session with bunches of youth pastors who are all very busy pulling off all their programs, and they've got Friday night rolls around really quickly, and they've got youth club then, and they've got to do something on Sunday morning, and then they've got this big event coming off, and then they're trying to pull everyone together to go to that festival, and it's a busy life. It's really hard. And so the question can come, like, I haven't got time to go and sit and have coffee and cake with a young person after school every day, if that's what you're suggesting. I just don't have the time. I haven't got the capacity for it. And my normal answer, to be provocative, is then cancel everything you're doing, start again with this, and build from there. Put this as the priority, because all that you're doing will be building on the wrong foundations. And this, I absolutely convinced, is foundational to the development of exceptional leadership, and to leaders who will become passionate for Jesus, disciples who really walk the walk, and then can multiply and lead others. So if you're the one running around busy, making it all happen, you need to flip and divert the whole thing and become the one who's coaching everybody else to make sure that everything's happening. Because by raising young leaders, you're effectively raising a workforce who will do all the busy stuff that you're too busy doing, because you're releasing them into it. Anyway, enough said about that. We can come back to it later if you want to. That's the first thing. Mentoring accountability deals with the character, deals with the relationship in a way that programs can't. Second thing is training. Okay, and by that I mean intentional training. That's what we're doing right here, isn't it? We're doing here. You have already won at this. You're winning at this strategy because you have said it's so important that I continue to get creative thoughts, ideas, I get training, that you have taken 24 hours to be at Ekklesia. That's brilliant. And all of us need patterns of that. So you're already winning on this one when you think about you. But we need to be strategic about that training with our young people. Especially as like teenagers, students, people coming through who are wanting to influence, wanting to play their part, wanting to get involved. They will have plenty of passion, and it's brilliant. You can build on that passion. You can release them into all that sort of stuff. But you have to add skill to passion. Otherwise, the passion will burn out after about a year because they'll start getting tired, particularly if they don't have the skills and they keep hitting blocks or walls that they didn't even know were there. And because no one really trained them and talked them through certain things, they were hitting these walls, getting hurt along the process, and as a result, they're not going to carry on going on the tightrope. So this is a safety net that gives you the sense in which you can teach culture, you can teach skills and competencies, and you can give them strength to the passion that they're already carrying. Young people, anybody under 25, generally have a lot of energy and a lot of passion. They want to go at stuff. And one of the best things we can do in the safety net is give them the training that backs it and goes with it. Loads of stuff around the competencies that you can do with that. And I would build it in as a regular activity of what you do, not necessarily just an occasional conference. That might be part of the pattern, but build it in. So when I was full-time youth pastor at St Andrew's Chorleywood, this was before we launched Onelife, so we're talking kind of 16, 17 years ago now. One of the things that we did as a regular pattern, and Onelife as a young leaders organisation came out of that local ministry, so we were doing it locally, and that turned into something that became more very accidentally, really. It wasn't ever really strategically planned, it just sort of happened. But one of the things that we did as a regular thing was on a Sunday afternoon before the evening service, once a month, we did a leadership training session. And my expectation as the kind of key youth pastor there was that all the young people who were involved in leading in some way would come to that. And so they knew that that was a place where they were going to get regular training. But we made it an open session, and this was the important part of it. So all the young people that were doing small groups or running missional communities or making things happen in their schools or their sports clubs, they would all come. And those that were in leadership in other places, not just the church. So if you were a prefect at school or you were a captain of your sports team, you'd be encouraged to come to that leadership training because it was going to give you a distinctively Christian slant on the leadership training that you needed. And so you could do that better, and we were resourcing people to do it. But we would open it to any of the young people, even if they didn't feel like they were in any position of influence or leadership. And one of the brilliant things about doing that is that you then got to spot early adopters for leadership. So sometimes, and I still remember, people sitting there who would sit in that session, and I'd look across and go, I would never have expected Mark to come to this. I would just never have expected him to put his hand up and go, I want to do this. But there he is. He's getting training even before he's stepping into anything. And for me, as the youth pastor, I was thinking, brilliant, I can start encouraging him, get alongside him. I'm going to go and do some mentoring accountability because there's clearly in his heart a desire to grow into this. And so you could begin to spot the people that are coming through that you may not spot. And again, sometimes, with our biases, we don't spot certain people, but they're presenting themselves in that context. So it's a helpful tool for that. So have a regular space for training and development, and that's going to accelerate the growth and add skill to passion, and build that into regular activity wherever you can as you go forwards. Right, racing through. Culture of encouragement is here. C of E. That's nothing to do with C of E, okay, the Church of England. But culture of encouragement, and that came up beautifully from Janet here, who was talking about encouragement as something that's really important. And it's so simple, and yet we can build a culture of encouragement around us. And the reality is this: if people don't feel that they're going to meet with encouragement, they're going to be scared to get onto the tightrope. So they have to know that they're going to be met with a culture of encouragement when they make their mistakes and their failures. Otherwise, they won't get out there and do it. They just won't do it. You can imagine that yourself, can't you? You know that there's been somebody in your life who's been an encouragement to you, and as a result, you grew in the direction that they were leading, right? That can happen with a teacher in school. I remember, I'm not very good at English. My spelling is really still poor, and I'm not an English person, but I ended up doing English A-level, English literature A-level. I mean, what was I thinking? I'd hardly read a book until I was 16, not interested at all. Why did I do it? Because the English literature teacher was somebody who was into drama as well, and I liked acting, and I sort of got on well with him, and he was so encouraging. I really enjoyed his lessons. It was nothing to do with the fact that I was good at that or English. In fact, I'm rubbish. I'm still poor at that kind of area. But there was this encouragement that enabled me to fly. And so I did. I passed my A-level in English literature. Almost unbelievable. I can't believe it because I'm still not skilled in it. I mean, how do I do that? But there was this culture of encouragement that enabled me to fly. I only got a C, but I passed. So, quick illustration of this that might be helpful. If I do a quick a scale here of 0 to 10. So 0 is not encouraging at all. This is if you spend time with somebody who's in the 0 category, you're going to go away feeling really heavy and it's really hard and nothing's going to work anymore. You may as well go to bed today because there's nothing more going on, right? 10 is uber encouraging, almost such a kind of an affrontage of encouragement. It's almost too much to take and you're overwhelmed. Okay, so this is a scale. If we were to talk about your personal culture of encouragement, so let's just make it to you first. We'll bring it back to this stuff, okay? So let's make it you. If you, walking into a room, you individually carry a culture of encouragement, what grade would you give yourself? Would you give yourself a 5? I'm I'm quite encouraging, but I've got a lot of room to go towards. Maybe some of you are a 9 or a 10 because you just know that is your thing and you've worked on that. Give yourself a grade right now. I'm going to give you 10 seconds of silence to give yourself a mark. You can have half marks if you like. That's 10 seconds. Hopefully helpful for somebody. Janet, you're giving yourself a 10, which is probably why you named encouragement at the beginning. Okay, so again, some context that we're in might be different. Okay. You're up at 10. So something about that environment calls it out of you, which is interesting. That's really interesting. Okay. Okay, well, there's something to work at. Okay, all right. So we've got it's got 10. So somebody else give me their grade. I've got 10 from Janet, but I'm going to go with somebody else. Come on, give me a grade. 6. Okay, we've got Andy Frost, leader of the conference. Here we go. Is coming in at a 6 here. Okay, so this is Andy. Thank you for sharing with us, Andy. We'll talk about strategies for Andy to grow in his. No, we won't. Okay, now Andy's leading SJI. He's leading this conference. He carries this kind of probably 6 out of 10 as a culture of encouragement. Okay, going back to this initial concept of you and you being the leader who influences the culture that you're leading. The culture of the thing that Andy's leading is likely to be somewhere around a 5.5. Now, there will be some outliers. So if we were to go to his team, and teams of people that he works with, there'll be some outliers. There'll be a few Janets who just carry encouragement, okay? There'll be some outliers. But the general culture of the team is likely to be just somewhere just behind him because he's the key lead. He's setting culture, he's setting the tone, he's setting the kind of comments that are permissible and get welcomed in the office. He's setting the kind of sense in the room when we walk into space, okay? So he's at about a 6. So if you want to increase the culture of encouragement in the thing you're leading, maybe you're leading a youth ministry, maybe you're working with some students, whatever it is you're doing with young people, if you want to increase the culture of encouragement, which in turn will increase the safety net ready to release them, you can take responsibility for increasing your own culture of encouragement to 7. So if you think, okay, there's some practical things I can go to with 7, and then inadvertently what then happens as a result of you going to 7 is the whole thing comes up to 6 or 6.5. And so you can start building it. Now there's practical things you can do, so talk to Janet afterwards about that, because she'll give you some ideas about how to be encouraging. One of them is just to clock it and say, this is something that is valuable and important. And I'm going to build strength and encouragement. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to watch a TED talk about encouragement. I'm going to start writing a note a week to somebody because when you've got the written word, particularly for an introvert, that's going to be something that's lasting, that endures beyond a side comment after a talk or something, but it's an enduring thing that they'll keep forever. My daughter's 9. She got a letter from her teacher 4 weeks ago. She has kept it under her pillow. That is encouragement, and there's deep encouragement that goes way beyond the 3 minutes it took for her teacher to write that note. And that's building a culture of encouragement that keep her going. Come on in. Yeah, okay, that's such an important point, and I think I won't linger on it too long, but one of the important things is that a strong culture of encouragement will have an absolute air of reality to it, which includes feedback. So a proper culture of encouragement will also be calling stuff out of people that's not yet there. So it's able to name this is what's good, but it's also able to name this is where we can grow. And when people experience that in a positive way, they feel, actually, do you know, sometimes encouragement comes in the form of an improvement. So it's like, this was great. This is an area to really grow in. And you can walk away feeling like deeply encouraged because somebody took time enough to give you the feedback that you need in order to be better in that area. And certain personality types will really need that. Others struggle with it more, and you as a team leader need to work out the difference. But essentially, that is an important part of encouragement. So if somebody is just uber encouraging to the 10 all the time because it's just everything's amazing, actually, I would argue their culture of encouragement more about 7.5. It's not bad. They're trying, just giving everything. But part of encouragement is bringing the development, the critique, the building of a person. Okay, to encourage is to put courage within. And courage, essentially, we heard it defined a little bit earlier, wasn't it? But to encourage someone to put courage in. And part of courage is the ability to push through something that you don't want to do or can't do. And so that is what we need to help young leaders to do. And that's part of building in a culture of encouragement if we were to delve deeper into that. I hope that's helpful. I'm going to keep racing on. What time is this session finished? 3:15. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, well, I'll go even faster, okay? Okay, well, let's keep going. Okay, so here we are. These are 3 safety nets, okay? Now, if you get those 3 safety nets in place, you're in a context, you're ready where actually the tightropes can really fly because you've got these things backing people up. You know, when it goes wrong, you can bring them back to the training and you sort of think, we'll do this in training session next time because this team dynamic just didn't work, so let's go back to that. You could be preempting the team dynamic and knowing that it's going to be difficult when you get those young people to make that thing happen over there, and so you train them before, whatever. You're using all of these areas to develop the trust, the character, character, the skill on top of the passion, and that culture of encouragement, so they're bold enough to step out even into things that they don't think they're ready for, and to push into. So here are the tight ropes, and so the next one, let's go for this one, real contexts. Here we go. And again, we named this, didn't we? So we know this to be true. We know it. And we know it in our own story that when we've been given a real context, then we've actually walked with something. So a real context is a place in which there is actual responsibility and accountability. Okay, so that's how you know when you're in a real context. Okay, sometimes, particularly in the church world, we can sometimes think, oh, well, I'll tell you what, we'll get one of the teenagers to do a reading on Christmas Day, and then we're including the teenagers in the church, and we're raising up young leaders. But again, the young person will sniff that out and sort of think, well, if this is what you've been training, all this training and this mentoring has all been about, like, yes, communication is an element of leadership. Yes, being able to read in front of people will help them as a skill base to develop them, but that's not the pinnacle of leadership because it doesn't carry responsibility and accountability. It has to carry both of those things for it to become a real context. So ask that question. Does what you're asking of them carry responsibility and accountability? Okay, so it's and that accountability can go beyond, of course. You, if you're really raising young leaders, there's an accountability level to you because you're trying to make sure these things are in place in order for this to fly, and you're accountable for that so that they don't fall off the tightrope and it hurts. So there's accountability at a number of levels, but they need to feel that sense of accountability, which brings us back to the culture of encouragement, because if you're encouraging young people into a real context but they don't deliver, if you just go, oh, don't worry, it's all right, you're actually undermining the real context and you're undermining the culture of encouragement, because suddenly they're not going to perform at any level because they sort of think it doesn't matter anyway. So you've got to bring accountability and let them know that there's accountability to what you're asking them. Real contexts are really important to develop in giving people experience. That sense of getting away from the token involvement and helping to develop different elements of leadership. So leadership isn't just about doing the reading at front. Leadership's about vision, it's about team dynamics, it's about developing strategy, sowing vision, thinking things through, turning that vision from vision into action and moving all those different elements. Those are all the kind of things you can be doing in training, but then you've got to give them the practice of it. And that practice of it is what's going to embed the learning and give them an opportunity to keep growing. So the real context is absolutely essential. Sometimes that's risky. Sometimes they're going to get it wrong. But if that happens, you're in good company with Jesus and the disciples, who he'd send out into the real context, go out in pairs and go and pray for people to get healed. And sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't work. This demon didn't come out, so what do we do there, Jesus? You know, there's a failure. It's a real context has gone wrong. Jesus has to teach you a little bit more and go back into training mode. And so there's this pattern in which he's trying to raise them into the real context. If you're thinking, well, how do I create real context? What does that look like in our context? Well, I can't speak to everybody's situation because you're in different situations. But if you're in a church-based thing or a charity, find ways of engaging and including young people and young leaders in some of the decision making and in some of the shaping of the vision. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to carry ultimate responsibility for it, but they can be involved in those things. So make sure there's inclusion there. But also, one of the best ways of doing it is creating projects that really matter and will turn the dial on the overall vision, but ultimately if they fail, it's not going to sink the ship. So it's not going to be something that actually then, oh gosh, the church is going to have to close down now because we gave them the entire budget to pull that off and it hasn't worked. Okay? So you think about what you give, but you can create projects. One of those things would be missional activities. So there's almost that sense of, oh, we know there's an opportunity here. What would it look like for us to plan and deliver something and actually get some sort of thing going that we've never existed before? So you give them that and you kind of sow the vision. This is what we'd love to happen. Go away, start talking. Who's going to be in the team? Who do you need to pull around it? What resources do you need? Start planning the whole thing and let's help you deliver it. If that's a time-bound thing, it really helps because then you're not committed to it forever. It's not like you've appointed them to a leadership position that's never going to end unless you sack them, and that can be an awkward thing. But it can be like a time-bound thing. So maybe it's the village fair, or that you sort of think we're going to do some stuff at the village fair, but we want you guys to deliver that. Here's the idea. This is what we're going for. Off you go. And it gives them a project to work on that could work in that sense. It could be a fundraising event. You could say, actually, one of the things we do with Onelife is each year we give our interns, so interns who come for a year, one of the projects they get put on their desk pretty quickly after they've arrived at Onelife is a fundraising event sometime in May or June. So we say we'll always do a fundraiser sometime in May or June, and this is what's been raised in the past. This is what our aim is to raise this year. So they've got a sense of the real measurable. So there's a responsibility and an accountability. This is in your hands. We don't mind what it looks like and what we do as a fundraiser, but what we'd love it to be is something that includes other young leaders. So this has got to be multipliable for other young leaders to be involved in as well, and helps us to be able to tell people about the vision of Onelife. And so they go away, they think, they plan, they come back with an idea. We say, I'm not sure. Yes, let's shape it this way. Here's what I'd be thinking if I was you. But they're planning the whole thing, and then they're accountable for raising £12,000 in May. And for an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old, if they're coming after university or a little bit later after work, that's a big responsibility. They're suddenly thinking, oh, wow. Now, if it all goes wrong and we raise £0, is it going to sink Onelife? No, it's going to cause some problems in our cash flow, but it's not going to sink us. But if they get there and they even just raise 8,000, that's amazing. And they've got a sense of, wow. And actually, year on year, they've often outstripped the year before, and they've come up with things and learnt from others before. They've built teams, they've made things happen. And so that would be a tangible thing that carries an accountability and responsibility. There's a couple of examples. I'll give you more, but I'll go through to get going. So real context. Now, connected to real context as a tightrope is vision that releases vision. Okay, vision that releases vision. Now, what I mean by that, I'm not going to go into all the sort of stuff that I'd normally do here and all the stories and everything, but essentially, if you know where you're going, you can run faster, can't you? So if I'm going to start, if I say, right, let's all do a race, stand up, 3, 2, 1, go, and then you'd immediately all look totally confused and not know where you're going. Those of you who are confident would just start running because you're something, I reckon the finish line's over there, but many of us would just be like, what is going on? Because there's not been the set, sort of, this is what we're aiming for, this is what's going on. So places that have a clarity on their vision and have wrestled that clarity down and understand that vision and are communicating that vision so the vision lives and breathes in the culture are far better at releasing leaders than places that don't have that vision. Because it's exactly the same. If you have a place where the vision isn't clear and people don't know the name of it, they don't understand it, it's not in the ether of the culture, oh yeah, it's on a bit of paper that we kind of worked on 4 years ago, but we haven't got it out of the drawers for a few years, all that stuff. If it's like that, it's like standing up to young people and saying, we want you to lead, go! And they're like, but where are we going? And the worst thing that can happen is that they start running and building in directions that you actually don't want them to. So then you pull them back and no, not like that. And they're like, well, what do you want then? Like, I don't know where to go. So clarity of vision is really important. Overall for your church or your charity, but a sense of vision of what you're even expecting from these young leaders. This is where we're going. This is what it's about. Now, when you set vision, that's one thing. But this is vision that releases vision. And there's an art to this that if you want to, we can come back to. But essentially, what you're trying to do is set vision that releases vision in other people. So your vision isn't so contained that you're basically saying to people, you have to do what I say. I'm the leader, I've got the vision, this is what we're all trying to achieve, fall in line or go somewhere else. Now, it's amazing how many places actually do exist and run like that. It's staggering, really. Yeah. Closing it. Wow, that sounds very harsh. So that's not going to release vision. But I think it can be a problem sometimes because if you are visionary, you get passionate about what you're building. But then you can become very confined in what it is that you're expecting of people. And so really, you are just celebrating people who are doing exactly what you want them to do. And ultimately, that's one way of leading people, but it's like breaking people in to become like you, rather than releasing them into what God might have for them. And the art of building healthy environments that cultivate lots of young leaders means that you're actually developing spaces where they can express maybe something that they have a sense of, a gifting that they've got that you might not have, that they want to bring to the party, something that they're going towards. Now, it can all help to build the wider vision. And one really quick example that I often use in this case is, again, going back to Onelife. Onelife exists to connect and equip young people and students to become exceptional leaders in every sphere of society. It's all around kind of developing character, developing their impact. So that's what we're trying to do. So that's what we're going for. When we first started Onelife, there were a number of very committed people who were right at the core of it and praying for it, cheering it on. About a year in, one of them came to see me. She was called Florence. And she said, Pete, I just love what we're building on Onelife. It's so amazing to see these young leaders conferences. It's like amazing to see these young leaders being resourced and seeing them active and doing stuff. It's really exciting. And she said, I've got such a passion for family. And as I've watched all that's going on, I'm just thinking, wow, the number of conversations I've had with young people at conferences who are coming from broken homes, who don't even know what home looks like anymore, and they haven't got a picture for that anymore. And I'm really worried that we're gonna establish kind of young leaders all over the country who don't really know how to lead their homes. And so we're cheering them on to become kingdom builders elders in every sphere of society, in politics, education and arts, but when they walk through the front door, they won't know how to cultivate relationship or strengthen family or invest in the right things in order to make that nuclear really strong. Now, I'm passionate about that. So I could have said to her, Florence, that's so amazing. I love your passion for family. We're really interested in just working with young people, young teenagers. But I didn't. I said, go away, write the vision down. So she wrote down a 20-page document. So then I said, go away, make it 2 pages. So she went away, made it 2 pages. Came back and I thought, yeah, do you know what? You're onto something. This is not something I was building, but there's a gift and a skill and a vision in you that needs to be released. And it is related to what we're doing. And you've got to watch for vision, mission creep and all those sort of things. That's another conversation. But essentially there was something there. And so we convened a weekend away and we took 5 families away with their kids for a weekend away just to talk about what does healthy family look like from different patterns and measures and different contexts of family, from families that we think have done discipleship well with their young people. We took them away, we had conversations with them, we pulled out different ideas and we set those ideas into motion. So for example, still now, I'm not running Onelife anymore, but if you go to a Onelife conference, you'll often see kids running around, and that's an intentional decision because it's like, actually we want to model family. So we're happy for somebody who's on team to have their kids around the conference and those kids to be a full part of that conference, not hidden away in a group or tucked away to do something different, but they can be a fully integrated part of that. My kids love Onelife, but they're not even teenagers. They're not supposed to be there yet, but they love that. We'll intentionally have people on team who are a bit older, who have got more the grandparent role, who have got time to spend time, who will pick up some of the young people on the fringe who perhaps don't even have a grandparent role at home. And so we'll put certain things in. We'll have like an afternoon tea and have this experience of trying to sit down around. I don't know if that happened this year, but those kind of things go in all the time. Creative ideas based around the family. So it's a vision that releases a vision. That's what it's got to be. So you've got to start releasing it. And the more releasing you can be of other people's visions and see things cultivated, motivated, the more engaged you get young people being. And that kind of really releases them. The last thing is external engagements. External engagements. And I learnt this more out of painful experience than out of clever thinking. External experience, what do I mean by that? Is if you want to have a healthy tightrope and build this environment where young leaders will thrive, you've got to allow them to grow in other places than just the bubble they're in currently with you. One of the reasons for that is that we saw a lot of young people stepping into leadership and influencing through St Andrews. I've seen that at HTB as well. I've seen it through conversations with lots of people from lots of different contexts, where it's almost like in their home environment, they grow, they've got confidence, they're influencing, they're going, then they go off to another environment, and suddenly they're not quite as confident, and they're not sure that what was going on here actually works here. And what you saw them walking in here, which was so profound and amazing, and they were leading a community of young people at their school of 25 people, and this was really happening. They felt confident. They were a key member of your community in the work that you were doing with your church, and then they go away to a different context, and within 6 months, they're just not doing anything, and maybe they've even fallen away from their faith. And like, how has this happened? And that happened for us. I know there's a number of factors to do with, young people going to university and transition times and all those sort of things. There's a number of factors. But I started thinking about that from the leadership point of view and recognizing that actually if you give somebody the bubble experience where they can thrive and they love it, but you never allow them to go and experience that outside of the safety you've created, the safety net you've created, they're never going to be reflecting on what that looks like if they're going to another context. And they have to if they're going to thrive way beyond their time with you. And if we're serious about raising young leaders, we've got to be raising them not just for the 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 years that they might be with you, but for the rest of their lives. And so you've got to give them external experiences where they can come back having had a failure or success and reflect on what it looks like to lead in a different context. That might mean sending off a worship team to go and lead worship in another church and saying, go for it, and off they go. It may mean sending somebody off to go and shadow a different business person who is not even in your church. And the danger is they might like that person so much they end up going to their church instead. But that would be a kingdom win, wouldn't it? Because they're growing and they're strengthening and something's happened in that relationship that's going to take them on to the next level. So that would be a good thing. So you're looking for opportunities where you can actually help them grow beyond the safety that you have carefully created in your safety nets. And you've got to start being strategic about giving them way into that and making that work where you can. Okay, I've talked for a little while and we've got to finish in a couple of minutes. Just do one thing to reflect, and I've cut out lots of stories and other stuff around it to illustrate it, so you may come back with a few questions. We'll have just 2 or 3 minutes of questions in a moment. But for a couple of minutes, I'd love you to think, going back to you personally, okay, you can, actually let's do this for the context you're leading in, so your church or your charity, your ministry, whatever it is you're working on. So do it for your context. I want you to give yourself a mark out of 10 for each of these areas, for how well you think you're doing. It's a little bit subjective. I'm not giving you careful criteria to give yourself a mark out of 10. It's a subjective question. But you may think, mentoring accountability, yeah, that's a high priority in the church that we are in, the charity I'm running, that's a really high priority. So I'm going to give ourselves an 8 out of 10. Okay, training. Actually, do you know what? We've come to Ekklesia, but that's the only thing in a year that I come to that's training. So that could do a lot of work. That's only 2 out of 10. So give yourself a mark out of 10 for each of those, and it'll give you an overall mark of 60. Okay, I'm going to give you 1.5 minutes to do your marking. Okay, go. Okay, let's say you've just done that exercise and you've managed to pull out a 32 out of 60. Okay, don't know if that's anyone here, but there we go. So you pulled a 32 out of 60. One of the things I just want to leave you with as a thought, a challenge, is to say, well, what would it look like for you within the next 4 weeks to pull it up to 36 out of 60? Okay, now that's not much of an increase, but it's going in the right direction. And you could look, and there might be some low-hanging fruit where you sort of think, do you know what? It wouldn't take much just to tweak that. It wouldn't take much just to act on something there, to actually make a difference, to choose something that's going to mobilize this, so that you move from 32 to a 36. It's not unthinkable to move to a 40 out of 60 within the next 4 weeks if you really worked at it and took it as a strategy and thought, well, okay, we need to work on this piece, so I'm going to move myself from the 6 to 7. That's 1 point. That's going to be really great. Mentioning accountability, I've only got 1 out of 10 there, so actually all I need to do is make sure that I'm engaging in that and I'm beginning to provoke that in others. And that will move from a 1 to a 4 out of 10 quite quickly because you're suddenly moving in that direction. So think through, where are the areas that you need to work on? How could you increase your mark by 5 to 8 points within the next 4 weeks? And I'd encourage you after this session, maybe even take a moment just to write 1 or 2 practical things where it's like, if I just did this and this, it would turn the dial and I'd be moving in the right direction for creating a culture that releases young people into leadership. I'll leave you with that. Let's just take a couple of minutes if there's any kind of questions that you've got or something you think, no, actually this is definitely not right, Pete, or there's a clarification or any question you might have to build into. We'll just take 1 or 2 minutes as people are coming in. I'll drop the microphone now and we'll just talk here for a second and then we'll go and get coffee.